So this panel, I think when Len and I first started our conversations, I'm not sure he was understanding quite what I was trying to get at with this panel. And then my husband happens to have an academic background, and he's the one he said, I think they call it grounded research. Do that, and then the academics might get on board. So I don't know if it's really called grounded research, but that's what we'll call it. The objective of this session is to explore how individuals from different scenarios have developed their sense of professionalism and incorporated it into their lives professionally and personally. So our first speaker will be Blake Langhill from Ernst & Young. So just trying to get this mic in the right spot. He is a partner at Ernst & Young's Assurance Services practice. Blake is in the GTA and didn't have to travel too far today. In their minings and metals industry group, he's had more than 15 years experience providing audit and advisory services to many of Canada's leading mining companies, including advising them on the transition to international financial reporting standards. We all know that was a bit of a challenge. And he's also been part of the E&Y's professional practice group, where he's provided technical accounting and regulatory advice to many of the firm's clients. So from that perspective, I think of this, as I said this morning, coming from an organization where everyone is coming from a similar background, similar objectives. So that's the scenario I've asked him to speak from in this, my grounded research, as we're going to call it. Then the next speaker is Chad Davis from LiveCA is the name of the organization. Something he started, what did you say, 2013 is when it started? Yeah, and this is Canada's largest virtual accredited CPA firm. Now I have to say, last night when I introduced him to Elaine gave me a look, and all of a sudden I went, when I say virtual, does that mean someone thinks that I mean those avatar kind of things? But I'll let Chad explain that a little more when he speaks. But in 5 years, LiveCA has grown to involve 50 employees. He serves some of Canada's largest technology clients without a physical office. Offering pre-approved programs to CPA candidates remotely brings its own unique set of challenges, which Chad will share with you in his panel session. Now, Elaine, I've met Elaine a few years ago now. She is with the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. And where she's grown up through in professionalism is in industry. She's, as I said, with the Alcohol and Gaming Commission, and before that with the LCBO. For those of you who aren't from Ontario, the Liquor and Control Board of Ontario. She is also the president of the Waterloo School of Accounting and Alumni Association. And that will give her another perspective to speak from. She is senior manager at the Alcohol, Gaming, and AGCO. Thank you. I have this acronym jar in my office that people have to put money in when they use acronyms, so I try not to. She provides strategic advice to the Chief Administrative Officer in her current role. One of the things that really struck me was when I looked at Elaine's LinkedIn profile, speaking of living in the social world, was a contribution from someone who put their comments on, is this person said, I have been treating my designation as just a ticket to a job. Elaine changed that perception with her passionate speech. Yes, the CPA provides us with a toolbox of skills and knowledge, skills we should dutifully carry over into other aspects of our lives, including charitable activities in order to flourish, both in our career and our life. So I thought Elaine was a perfect person to talk on this panel. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blake to talk about professionalism and how he got his concept of what professionalism was.
That's great. Thank you very much, Karen. And thank you to both yourself and Len for inviting me up here today. As I said to a couple of you, this is a little bit of a different venue for me to speak in, but I'm quite happy to be here, and it's been quite a fascinating morning so far, and looking forward to after getting off of here, relaxing a little bit, and then listening to the afternoon sessions. But maybe just by way of a little bit more background, so I got into accounting coming through the MMPA program, or the Masters in Management Professional Accounting program out in Mississauga. And so so I went through that. I have a liberal arts degree in economics. That's my actual background. And so I was kind of a little bit later in life coming into the accounting profession. And, you know, in terms of my career at EY, yeah, it's been primarily in the audit practice. I've spent some time in our national accounting group, and I also more recently have done a rotation in our accounting advisory group as well. So that's kind of a little bit of my background. And so then, the question that was posed to me is, well, what do I think professionalism is? And quite frankly, I feel like this is a little bit of a test after Len's presentation earlier. And then I also found that I actually found a different dictionary than Len did. So the dictionary definition that I wheeled out was it's the competence or skill expected of a professional. But when I reflect on what it means to me, it's more about the behavioral expectations of a professional. In particular, when times are tough. Like, professionalism's easy when everything's going along well, but, someone's level of professionalism, it really hits the nail on the head when times are tough and things are difficult. And so I think that's really the measure of someone's professionalism. And but that's the key, is I think at the end of the day, it's what's expected of me. And I have to say, from when I started my time, right, in the MMPA program, all the way through to today, it certainly evolved significantly over time in terms of what I think people expect of me. It's interesting. When I first came into things, I thought, okay, professionalism, what does that mean to me? This is even before I take a course at the program. It was, this is about being polite, working hard, not rocking the boats. That's professionalism. And then I made my way into my auditing classes, and I think actually my auditing professor is in the room here somewhere. Hey, Wally, good to see you again. So he may or may not remember this, but this is one of these interesting things, and maybe my memory's fading, but certainly when I reflect on what I thought professionalism, or what I took from what's expected of an audit professional, I thought, okay, well, you've got to have, obviously, make sure you're on guard for deception, for fraud. There was that great video we got shown, which is probably crazy out of date now, where the audit room was bugged and the management team was coming up with all the answers a little too conveniently. So I remember that. And then I remember knowledge of the business. And so this is in the mid-90s. And so, okay, that's what is expected. I got to know the business, and I've got to be looking out for things. So then I move on into the firm. And so it's interesting that, in keeping in mind the context of the early mid-90s, is what was the focus of the firm. So my first thing I got was, when I went in the door of the firm, was a flow charting tool. And so we were flow charting business processes, not financial accounting or financial reporting processes, but business processes, because they do intersect with financial reporting and the accounting, but that's where we want to go. And then I also reflected, and I thought, the other thing that was quite interesting during those early days was, all the sort of staff reward and recognition programs mostly were predicated on finding business opportunities at my audit clients. And I think we may have heard some commentary this morning that we know where that landed. And it was also interesting that the group I was in at the time was called Auditing and Advisory Business Services. Once again, the word business shows up. So, but it's interesting, and it's, you still had to be a skeptical auditor, but I think, the expectation of the DNA of a professional seemed to have this, you got to be drumming up business. Like, that's, you got to have great, strong client relationships. So I always found that kind of interesting, but it's in those early days, there was this element, notwithstanding all this raw, drum up business kind of thing, that you did have to look at yourselves in the mirror at the end of the day. And so it was quite interesting that when I was a manager, I was stuck in the middle of a bun fight between an audit partner and one of our national accounting partners. And this was all about, the detail, to put some context. It was all about whether a lease was operating or financing, and you can kind of guess where the client was leaning, and where our national accounting person might have gone. But it was interesting. I sort of saw my role. Okay, I've got to support my engagement partner. I've got to, defend. This is great. The client's right, and so on. And we went through those discussions, and there were some rather heated ones. But it was interesting. I remember about 2 or 3 days later, after we signed off on the audit, that the national accounting partner pulled me aside, and I will never forget this as long as I live. He pulled me aside. He says, "Listen, Blake," he was rather forceful, and he was probably almost poking me in the chest. But he said, and I've got this in quotes, if you truly want to succeed here, you have to challenge things. You have to speak up. You have to be able to go home at the end of the night and look in the mirror and say to yourself that you honestly believe that the client's accounting was right. And that stuck with me. And I have to admit, I went home and I basically freaked out and kind of was quite stressed. I'm like, oh my goodness, one of the national accounting partners is poking me in the chest, telling me this. But having said that, the message was loud and clear. You have to do the right thing, even when it's not comfortable. And the other point to that too was, people are watching. People notice what I was doing, and they're paying attention. And I think the last thing is, doing the right thing, fine, but part of doing the right thing is making sure that you're speaking up. And as you can appreciate, that's not an easy thing to do, given that oftentimes speaking up is perceived amongst someone at, the manager or staff level is, career limiting move. And so how do you do that? And so then, of course, time moves along and my perception of professionalism does start changing a little bit, that partially based on that event, but then what I affectionately call the socks bomb dropped into the accounting world. And it was interesting because there was really, at the onset, there was really notwithstanding Enron, all these, Anderson disappeared and so on, that, there was this sort of, could never happen. This is, no way this could happen. That was kind of the common thing people would say. But interesting enough, you could see over time things start to change. And the way that I pick it up and the way that I notice it and the way that I think the message around professionalism was changed was just looking at the firm courses, for example. They went from being softer skills and, selling skills, understanding the basics of an audit, basically to, as I like to say, to ensuring that at all times we're doing quality in everything we do. Like the course is, the day of the name of the course was actually called Quality Day. Like we spent a whole day, it was all focused on quality. So you could see these things sort of changing. You see it in the agendas. Instead of there being a whole agenda item on trying to sell accounting services or what have you to our clients, there might have been one slide on something like that. And then also, magically, I went from being in the audit advisory business services group to the assurance group. So you could sort of see these things happening. And you could also see it in terms of the incentives of the audit practice. Also now, quality findings in our files were problems. You're rewarded for not having those, for getting a strong rating in the internal peer reviews or as time marched on through the regulatory reviews of the files. Partner promotions, interesting enough, went from people who were like the fantastic schmooze machines to people who were well-grounded in terms of technical expertise. And also, I should say, and also had very strong ethical foundations. You can see it in the partners themselves, and as a manager, as staff, and so on, you're watching the partners, you're watching what they do. All of a sudden, now their file reviews were much different. They were now peeling off the layers of the onion of the complex accounting issues. They were delving into the audit issues, the audit evidence much more strongly than they had in the past. You could also, going the other way, you also saw client disagreements increasing quite dramatically. But that said, you could also see that professionalism in this environment wasn't one where you were going to have to be a fascist or a dictator. There's a lot of people at the time who thought, well, we have to be so independent, in appearance and so on. We can't be sharing any insights. We can't be chummy. And so there became a lot of heated discussions and a lot of animosity that developed amongst audit teams and the clients. But I think that from my perspective in that environment, it was interesting to watch the people that I felt were the more professional ones. Like at the end of the day, they never compromised in terms of doing the right thing. But it was all about how to do it and articulate things and have meaningful conversations with our clients to at least try and articulate, explain why things were going on. You certainly had these independence rules and other things, but you had to keep yourself, it kept yourself in check. But at the end of the day, you had to keep your cool and you had to obviously stick to doing what was right. So, and it's interesting too, because I remember I personally got into one of these crazy heated accounting discussions with a client. And, I talked about you got to keep your cool and, I'll be polite but stick to your guns. And I remember I was with this client and he was not backing down. For what it's worth, I'm biased, but I thought his accounting position was quite aggressive. And this is what he wanted. And I remember he was yelling at me, like seriously, he was this far away from me and he was yelling at me. And I, was raised, you gotta be polite and proper and the whole thing. And I just went, stop. And I literally stuffed my hand in his face. I didn't touch him. I didn't break his nose or anything, but I kind of just stop and listen for 2 minutes. And it was great. And then I sat there and I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, this is like a social faux pas beyond all social faux pas. This is the CFO of a public company that I'm doing this to. And it was interesting, but afterwards I said to the partner, we obviously debriefed. I said, oh my God, Andre, that was like the craziest thing I think I've ever done. I can't believe I did that. He said, no, that was exactly the right thing you did. You stuck to your guns. yeah, you might have had a little bit of a rough edge, but so did he. So you kind of responded to the circumstance. At the end of the day, he respected your view and he listened and we got to the right answer. So I was, and so it was interesting. There was always that feedback, that debrief afterwards that I really, really tremendously appreciated in terms of how that played through. But it also taught me that that's a very important thing, that whole feedback loop. And sort of that's how sort of part of my frame up of professionalism has been defined by that event. I thought I made a tremendous blunder, and then to be able to talk it through and work through what was the right thing to do in that circumstance. So, and I guess that's, those are a couple of little anecdotes, but, at the end of the day, I think that's, the one thing I can say about all of this is that, my journey through the firm, learning about professionalism, it wasn't something that was taught in a classroom to Len's. I mean, I like to think it wasn't spotty, but I certainly take the point. But I think it's through this whole sort of talking to others, learning from my mistakes, all these sorts of things that I think at the end of the day was very important. And I think EY's culture, we have maybe other firms say this as well, but I truly fundamentally believe we do a very robust culture of consultation, which is all based on talking to each other. And to be fair, it's something that has developed much more so in the last, let's say, 10 years than the years before that. But it is the rock, the foundation of the whole thing. And so it really encouraged us to have all these conversations. And you can see from a professionalism perspective, where am I going to learn things? I'm going to learn things by talking to other people, debriefing things, those sorts of things. And so it becomes a tremendous thing for I think other people to learn as well. So that being said, Karen did ask me to sort of say, well, so how does this intersect with your personal life? And I actually, I so fundamentally believe that professionalism at the office does extend into your personal life. And whether it's fair or not, I label that for others, but, and maybe at the risk of being self-centered or some kind of capitalist, I don't know. But at the end of the day, my people's view of my professionalism outside of the office affects my professional brand and affects my personal brand. So I use my two little examples. One is, we have a nanny, a child care provider, and so there's some people who may not remit all the taxes. It happens, right? So there's no chance in heck I'm going to do that, because I could only imagine someone, hearing that story and saying, well, he can do it. Well, geez, all these other CPAs are doing that, or even just reflecting on me personally. Oh, here's someone who thinks he can skirt the rules. Same with my son plays competitive hockey, and so one of the things for anybody who's had a child who plays competitive hockey in Toronto, it's absolutely insane. But one of the things that happen is all these teams, there's committing and all this sort of stuff to teams even before the tryouts. But what's amazing is people decommit. So they say, yeah, I'm coming to you, and then they change their mind last minute and they leave. Like, can you imagine, like for me personally to do that, once again, what am I saying? I'm saying I'm going to make a commitment and then break it? Again, I think that having professionalism outside the office is equally important. And it's interesting too, let's plug for my wife. She's a CPA, CMA, and a CFA, and same thing. You just can't compromise this sort of stuff. So, but anyways, with all that said, I'm kind of running a little bit out of time, so I'm filling some of your time, guys. Sorry, but they may have asked me to. No, I'm just kidding. But it's interesting, in terms of when I think of, one of the things I did want to reflect on today is, professionalism today is incredibly complex. And what I mean by that is, there's this 24/7 responsiveness. Like I've got my phone here. Like there's an expectation at 2 a.m. someone sends me an email, I'm going to respond to it. The accounting has become incredibly complex. There's this wonderful substance, and principles and so on, but there's just a lot of rules. There really are. And so that makes things incredibly difficult. And sometimes it's just not going to match the business or commercial reality. You get these strange accounting answers. And then, we've got this tremendous compliance culture that's been touched on, and I'll just leave it. We have certain foreign regulators out there who can be a little bit interesting to deal with. I didn't say that, Justin. You don't know any. Anyways, but all of this is creating a tremendously high level of stress, and we all know professionalism is, on the margin, is compromised by stress. This is when people don't make great decisions, is when they're completely stressed out. I mean, I've been through some very difficult things in the last couple of years at the office, and I like to think that the professionalism that I've been taught has helped ground me in terms of all of that. Now, the other thing with all of this is, I have an economics background, so we all, how sustainable is all of this? And I'm the optimist, and I think that, through the mentoring and the personal coaching, all these things that I've been able to go through, other people will go through. I loved Len's discussion about trying to improve this in the educational environment, because certainly that would have been a great help for me, I think, in the early stages of my career. But I think that also what's going to help is this new generation of accountants that we have coming through the door now. One of the things I've seen, and I think it's a corporate spin, corporate culture kind of thing, but I think it's real to an extent, is having corporate purpose. Like there's the BlackRock CEO. He had that famous letter 2 or 3 years ago where he wheeled out and said, "Listen, this is important that you have and articulate a corporate purpose." And so having that, and it's interesting, the reason I reflect on that is, we even have one too, building a better working world. And so what does all this mean? How does all this fit in? But I think to the new generation, the millennials, as we may sometimes call them, they're looking for purpose. They want to have a purpose. They want to know what they're doing has purpose. And so I think what will help, stem the tide of negativism around professionalism is that I think some of the new generation, they're going to want to unearth what this role is, what this purpose is. And I think by doing that, that will help make the profession stronger in the end, because I think they're going to be driving some of the change towards better professionalism. Anyways, with that, over to Chad. Sorry. Thank you.
I look forward to proving you wrong, Len. Just kidding. No, it's always a nice thing to be on the underdog panel, and there's a lot of pressure, so here we go. Karen asked for me to take a bit of a different approach and talk about the practicality of, why even do something virtually? Why do you even exist? There's going to be people in the audience that may have never heard of you, have no idea what you're really doing, and would like to learn as an alternative to sort of what the standards are for when you're an accountant in practice these days. So I thought I'd bring it back to a little bit of a personal experience where I'll tell you a little bit about where I came from, what drove that decision, where we're at now as a company, but really then tie it at the end around professionalism and what we do as a company to practice professionalism directly. So a few examples of things that we've learned over the years. So that'll be the presentation for today. So I think that we've always taken, or my wife and I have always taken this view that what we want to do in our life has to have a little bit of adventure and a little bit of fun. And that started really early on, and we moved around a lot. I think the apex and the most enjoyable thing we've ever done was to move to the Cayman Islands for 5 years and get a place on the beach and live. And that's where I sort of got my panache for living in t-shirts. And one of the things that came out of that was, I think I own about 50 of these blue t-shirts, and I wear them wherever I go every day for the last few years. And I hope it doesn't get me in trouble, Karen, so sorry about that. But all right, thanks. So, a little bit of adventure and fun meant, okay, what's next after living on the beach? So we knew that there was this wave of technology changing, and it's happening all over the world. And I'm addicted and really, really enjoy the practical, operational accounting and telling somebody that something's possible and then showing them without having to research for days and weeks. And that sort of passion grew by working with companies remotely while I was in the Cayman Islands, because the company I was with was a family office, and obviously with places around the world that was quite convenient to work online. And there wasn't a lot of technology back in 2008 that actually worked that well online. So the progression of those 5 years saw incredible change. And there was this opportunity in Canada to create a company that would focus primarily on delivering accounting technology solutions to companies that had incredible tax accountants, but maybe not so much on the operational side of getting them the data that was really important to them. So that was a struggle, and I thought it was black and white, that we could come back to Canada, just do this and start up. And you learn a lot about yourself and how bad you are at selling and how bad you are at business, even though you might know accounting. And that was, again, a huge struggle for the first year. But we made the move, came back to Canada, and about 6 months after our first year, I met another gentleman who shared the same sort of vision of bringing this technology solution to Canadians as well. And his name is Josh, and he's my business partner. So from that meeting, when he reached out to me online, of all things, we eventually created and started working together this opportunity where a firm can exist and serve clients. At the time, he was overseas on a vacation. I was living in Halifax, as I do now, and we knew one thing was for certain. We knew that we didn't want to pay rent, and we knew that we didn't want to have an office because we just enjoyed the lives that we were living currently. So he was traveling, and I was working remotely with companies already. So that grew into what LiveCA is today, which is this virtual firm that was really created off of an embarrassing type of need to just have a really enjoyable and adventurous life and work from home and be with my family and my children. And it sounds very selfish, even coming out of my mouth today, but it's been the most enjoyable last 5 or 6 years of my life because it's really purpose driven. And I get to drive my kids to school in the morning. I get to pick them up if I need to. There is no conflict whatsoever between my life and my work. And that is an incredible feeling. So Josh and I, we realized that there's something to this, and we didn't really know what quite that was. So we hired a few people in the beginning that believed in the same sort of way of working. And fast forward 5 years, and we're up to over 50 people, and really can't keep up with demand for these types of services that are delivered virtually. So, LiveCA in a nutshell is really a virtual firm that services people all across Canada. Our employees are in every province except a few up north and Newfoundland. And we are an accredited training office, which is one of the most proudest things I've ever been involved with, because now we get to teach a different way of learning about accounting and tax than what was previously available. So it was a long process, and huge thank you to everybody at CPA Canada and Gord and everybody that was involved in that, because it was it legitimizes essentially what our ideas were for creating this company. I'm just going to refer back to a couple notes here. So with that, we're really trying to change sort of what a traditional business model looks like for an accounting firm. And even though we are legal partners in the firm, we're trying to treat this like a real business, where there's a leadership team and where there's something that exists that is sustainable. And if anything ever happened to one of the partners, what does that mean to the business? And in a small company, the impact of losing someone is incredibly devastating. So we, from day one, tried to create this sustainable company. It's hard when you have that type of mentality that partners and leadership team members don't service clients, they service the team. And that people first attitude is, I think, one of the pillars of what makes our approach to professionalism so much more important. It's one of those things that you look back on and say, I didn't really think about professionalism in the way that we're talking about it here today, but I know that we care about our people, and I know that we care about creating a sustainable company for people to work in the way that they want to. And the natural progression of that is just being responsible and professional in the way you act. Otherwise, nobody would work with you, you'd have a bad reputation, and it would not be something that would last very long. So some of the other things that we're trying to challenge with this business model is the way we price. We don't track hours, but we price based off of value. So conversations, getting to understand what people are looking for. We're equally as data-driven as we are emotionally driven. And I think in the beginning, we were incredibly emotionally driven. And that led down the path to a lot of unprofitable, on paper, relationships. But the emotional profit from all of those taught us what it was like to sell to people and what it was like to treat people with respect and all of the skills you don't normally get as young business owners. So something I'm very passionate about, that if we become a data-driven company, I'm afraid we may lose the emotion that keeps us adventurous and fun and keeping the things that are important to us. And it is hard. You have to sacrifice financially when you say no to somebody, because you know that the relationship may not be something that you want to embark on. So what have I learned about professionalism? I've learned that over the years, your interpretation of it changes. What I thought I was doing that was professional in year one is not what I thought in year two, and it definitely wasn't what I thought in year three. And it's because you go through a lot of experiences around hiring and around pricing and around delivering services, and they build upon each other. And then you slowly realize that, okay, these are the things that are important. So I'll go through these in a few seconds. So I've also found that I've taken on more responsibility, along with the members of the leadership team, to be able to promote this and this ideal of professionalism, which is that people come first, customers don't come first. And that has directed us in every decision we've ever made. And to back that up with some stats, we have churned, I guess is the polite way of saying, multitudes of customers so that our people stay happy working with the clients that make them the most fulfilled. And you may say that's crazy. Why would you give up all that money? And I would answer by saying the people are actually what make it an enjoyable place to work. And when you let someone go with a little bit of leeway to be creative and to serve other customers, and you mentor them, and you're there to help them along the way, people surprise you a lot. And that's what I've seen with our team. And that's how we've been able to grow and grow and grow. And we've had to put a limit on the pace of growth, because I know that if we get too much bigger right now, today, it's not going to be good for the culture. So guarding that culture and being people first is really, really important for me. Now, for what you might all have been thinking, it's a virtual firm. What does even that mean? How do you work? What do you do with clients? How does that actually exist? And I'll just say that even though all the discussions that we have with customers are virtual and they're through video chats, there are no in-person meetings. And these are with some of the biggest, we might even have worked with some of the people in the room here, accounting firms and clients in Canada. And that's okay. It's worked out so far. And for those that it hasn't worked out with so far, those aren't relationships that we pursue, and that's okay. So if you think about someone that's lost a sense, what we're doing today and talking is very personable. It's what everybody's used to. But if you take this away, you've lost that connection with somebody in real life. So you have to enhance some other senses. And what we've found is that to become a more professional firm, we've had to increase the level of our writing skills and the level of our speaking skills, because all we have is typically from the neck up every day of the week for 8 hours a day. And that has been one of the most satisfying things, is taking somebody who's been working in industry for 10 years, writing technical documentation as a tax person, and then bringing them out and putting them in front of a client. It's like deer in a headlight sometimes. But being able to take that and encourage and coach and give them experiences that they may not have gotten somewhere else, you're opening up these people to different situations that are actually enriching their lives. And again, very proud that you can do that in a company like this. So you can tell that words are very important. Today is an incredible example of how important it is to talk about professionalism and what it means to each one of us in this room. But as Karen asked me to talk more about the actions than the words, here are a couple examples on the grassroots of what it looks like for us to implement that level of professionalism. So the first one, which is the biggest one out of the gate, is letting go of employees. How do you do this virtually, professionally? Really hard, really hard. I thought that I needed to fly around the country to do this in person. And I was probably right for the first few. I learned that it was really hard to tell somebody to their face something that hard. But over the years, letting someone go should never be a surprise. It should always be the right amount of feedback and the right amount of coaching. And that was sort of our first introspective look at, what are we doing wrong that we had to let this person go? Is it hiring? Is it the way we work? Is it documentation? Is it support? I don't know. But actually, let's take a think about this and see how this works. So over the course of 5 years, you learn how to let someone go because you're focusing on all of the other things that have led you to that. So, yes, you have more frequent mentorship, you have more frequent coaching, you have more frequent feedback, and then it's not a surprise. And you can do that virtually because it's not as such of a shock. So, a practical example there. The other thing is the actual focus on feedback. Can't tell you how much we ignored this in the first few years. Being nice and polite and the Canadian way of just existing with others without really telling them how you feel. And in about year 3, we, I think, grew some backbones and started being brutally honest with people, both positively and negatively, every day, every minute that we could, and created this culture of instant feedback. And it's hard, and it's still 3 years running, and it's very hard to bring somebody new into this culture. So that's why we have full team retreats. We realized we needed to do that to keep that connection. So we fly people from all around Canada and go to a location for a week and have big retreats so that we can create those bonds and that trust. The other items, really quickly, how to hire. How do you hire somebody virtually? Well, carefully, but at the same time, you could really get burned. So what we instituted was this idea of a trial workday. Bring somebody in virtually if they've passed the tests of your interviews, and have them work with the team, see if they like it, give them feedback, see how they take the feedback on day 2, pay them to come in and actually work through it. And I think that's raised our level of professionalism because it creates a stronger bond between the person coming into the organization, and it creates an even stronger opinion from the people making the hiring decision on whether or not you want to hire this person. And getting them involved with 5 or 10 other people from the firm is a good way to welcome someone. So some quick stats. We've done probably 350 trial work days of people that we wanted to hire based off of an interview. And we've hired about 75 or so of that amount. So a lot of learning there. Keeping up with technology is also an incredible element of the company, but from the professionalism's perspective, this just falls back to the business model, and we're serving what people are actually looking for. So I think that there is this element of needing to answer people when they have questions about operational issues and accounting technology issues, and I've learned that it's incredibly more important to be ahead of the game than it is to just have a core set of tools that you then start using. So I believe we're teaching professionalism within our employees by having them think about the questions that people aren't asking yet, and doing public presentations to the team about what their ideas are for future ways of serving customers. I've probably gone over time. I'm so sorry about that. But again, it's incredible pleasure to be invited here by the folks at CPA, an incredible proponent of what we're doing. And I just look forward to answering any questions you have later if that's anything on your mind. So thank you, guys.
I just keep looking at the clock and I'm thinking, what can I cut? What can I cut? Because we're all about integrity and trying to stay respectful of people's time. So I will try to modify as I go. But first of all, I'd like to thank Karen, who I've met before. I actually know Karen through her husband, Tom, who I worked with the University of Waterloo. So I thought I was told this is really a test tube baby. This is very organic, and I'm just here to share my experience and how I developed my own sense of professionalism through my work experience. I graduated from the University of Waterloo. I came out of school, I had co-op, so I had a little bit of sense of what it was like to apply the things I'd learned in school. I knew ethics, I knew morality, I learned things like, certain judgment, decision-making. I had all those things in my arsenal, but really have to say that, it is very different even from a co-op until you really get out in the industry. So I actually was fortunate enough to be hired back to the LCBO, straight out of school, had a job waiting for me. And when I got there, I was actually also very lucky that I had a really good mentor. Actually, the CFO had told my manager that he wanted to specifically mentor me himself, and all his requests, he wanted to be done by me. So that's a very, very fortunate thing, and I can say that I definitely benefit from it, the benefit of having a solid role model. Now, the other thing is that I worked mostly in financial analysis and financial planning, which was very much with other professionals and CPAs. However, I did have the opportunity to also see what it was like working with non-professionals. Very early in my career, still first year, I worked in corporate accounting for a bit, and being the bright-eyed, smart, cocky, newly grad student, I thought I knew everything, right? So a lot of times when they were trying to explain something to me, I was like, yeah, I know, yep. I'd be like kind of finishing his sentences. We've all done that little internal dialogue in our head that we can't shut up. So that was one of the first lessons I had, because instantly the supervisor just stopped talking. He looked at me and he said, are you going to tell me what you should do, or are you going to listen to what I have to say? And let me tell you, that lesson has stuck with me forever. And I tell it to my own staff. I use it as an example because it's taught me to come from a place of humility, and that it's okay. And sometimes, actually, just even if I know something about it, pretend I don't. Because you'd be really surprised to see when you adopt that attitude, what you actually can learn. So that was one of my first lessons and big lessons. Fast forward, I had this great opportunity working with a lot of, CPAs, designated accountants who knew like similar things that I did. But I knew that I needed to really challenge myself, because as Blake had alluded to, I'm a firm believer that it is during times of adversity and challenge, when we actually make ourselves uncomfortable and shake things up, that is when we actually learn the most. So I took every opportunity, any opportunity that came knocking. You want me to do something, I raised my hand. You want to present the 5-year strategic plan in front of finance, although you've only worked here 2 years, raise my hand. I got to work one-on-one with the CFO, with the directors. Who wants to lead the annual financial plan? I raised my hand. Who wants to be the implementation lead for the new 3.2 million system? I raised my hand. I joined Toastmasters. I took every opportunity I had to get up and just be totally uncomfortable and really hone that leadership sense, honing those other professional skills that might not be exactly what was in school, but I thought I had to learn really through experience. So fast forward 11 years later, I had this wonderful opportunity at the Alcohol and Gaming Commission that came up. And no, it's not that I'm addicted to alcohol, although there is a similar theme. And at that time, I'd had experience with analysis, I had experience with planning. I really wanted to round up my portfolio, and I thought financial reporting was the best way to do it. So I thought, I'm going to go, and it's going to be very much like LCBO. Boy, was I wrong, okay? AGCO is probably 1/10 of the size of LCBO, and a lot of the people that worked there, let's say there was 3 other managers, nobody had studied accounting. Okay, so these are people who are close to retirement and who had been there just for the sake of having been there as a clerk, and through tenure and through years had just risen up the ranks. So someone had been a revenue clerk that was just counting money, and then 5 years later become the manager of payroll. So you can imagine I'm coming in and I'm being the manager of financial reporting, and I have to rely on data that's entered by people who don't have that specialized knowledge skill set. So that in itself created a whole bunch of reporting risk. There was a lot of internal controls. Just an example also, there was also a big impediment was the culture. So people there coming into AGCO, having been there for so long, they felt, if I've been here 5 years, I'm entitled to be promoted. A perfect example, and lack of confidentiality. There was a payroll clerk, and having access to payroll, she found out that her colleague had gotten a promotion. Marches into the payroll manager's office. I demand a promotion because this person got promoted. So without even telling you, we all here know that that's wrong, but that's just an example of what the culture was like there. And nothing can actually teach you professionalism better, and in terms of being respectful and courteous, than having to walk into an office with someone who's been there 20 years, who obviously knows way more about the business than I do, and having to tell them that what they've been doing for 20 years is wrong. Right? How do you go about do that? How do you conduct yourself in such a way that you can tell someone they're wrong without really making them feel and that you're coming from a credible place? You're respectful, you're being courteous, right? So how do you do that? So those are real tests of professionalism in the real world, right? So I'm trying to skip ahead. The other thing that really comes up, and I know the next session is going to talk about, speaking up when you know there's something wrong. And that's something I'm really known for doing at the AGCO. People are always like, how are you so open to C-suite? How can you talk to them like that? Because I find there's also a culture in a lot of the industry that some people get intimidated by senior management. And that's probably a big reason why a lot of them don't speak up. They don't want to ruffle the feathers. They don't want to be seen as kind of someone who's not collaborative. That's a huge thing that's going on right now. Everyone wants to be collaborative. But I always remind staff, and I had a conversation with another manager, actually, one day who had given a recommendation to senior management. And then behind the scenes, she's telling me, that's so wrong. Like, I know I shouldn't be doing that, right? Like, why am I? And I said, well, then why didn't you say something? And she says, well, my C-suite manager told me to do it, so I have to do it. And I said, and I had to pull her aside, and I said, you do realize that you make the salary that you do because that you have a specialized skill, right? And you have the decision-making knowledge that maybe your C-suite member doesn't know. And I said, it's your job as a professional to actually make them informed of everything so that they make the best decision for the company. Right, so a lot of times that's a very frequent thing. I find that, at least in my organization that we're going through right now, since it is a very old kind of real, and we're trying to bring it into the future. Right now we have an initiative called 2020, where we're trying to train managers to be more like progressive. We're moving digitally, that's another big thing. Another big example that I had with learning professionalism was in 15-16, we actually merged with Ontario Horse Racing. I was from, so yeah, now I can't bet ponies either. So no gambling, no ponies, but I can drink. And that was a totally different experience because they were a smaller organization. They were self-funded, whereas we weren't. So there was already obstacles about that, like how do we, there's a lot of differences of policies and procedures that need to be written up. The fact that they only had a 3-person accounting team. There's lack of segregation of duties. People who were approving invoices were also signing the checks. So there was a whole gambit of issues. And the minister had given us 2 years to do the merger. My CEO decided I can do it in 1. Okay, so within months leading into that, I was there and I was meeting one-on-one with each of the finance people, just trying to absorb as much as I could. And now applying the lesson that I learned, coming from a place of I know nothing, you tell me, you're the expert, I'm relying on you. We developed a really strong relationship with each of the 3 people. And this kind of alludes to Lemon's question earlier before about what do you do when people who have all that knowledge, they leave the organization. Well, one day before they were supposed to come over, they all resigned. Okay, so everybody in the entire finance team that was from the Ontario Racing Commission, who had all these years of knowledge about the industry, who the providers were, how we get our funding, how the budgets are made, gone. Okay, and a lot of them were like, I'm done. I'm not working there anymore. Don't call me. Blah blah. And so a lot of times they were ignoring the calls of my boss and my CAO. But guess what? I'd established a long-term relationship with them. All those months leading into it, they knew I respected them. I was courteous to them. They knew that I needed their help, and so every time I picked up a phone or I called them, they were more than happy to help. So I find that's one of the great ways to overcome obstacles like that. It's definitely the relationships, and for me, I find that's something that's a little hard. It's very intangible. It's very difficult to teach, but I find that, if anything, it's the relationship building, it's establishing that trust that has really helped me be successful in today. Now, putting on the hat, Karen had mentioned that I'm the alumni president of the University of Waterloo School of Accounting and Finance, and I'm also a CPA mentor, and I'm on the Mentorship and Connectedness Committee also for Waterloo. And I just want to share a little bit about my observations of how they're learning and maybe some opportunities or things that I think we need to watch out for. Okay, so right now, one of the best things that we do at Waterloo is that the alumni are always looking for opportunities to connect. Originally it was just about connecting with each other, the alumni. And then we started hearing that students actually wanted to connect with alumni. So we kind of changed our focus, and how we do that is that we have a fellowship program. The fellowship program, students apply, and they're selected, and they are assigned a fellow who is basically their mentor for their 4 years at the school, along with a scholarship. So they can call them at any time, they can meet them up for coffee. Getting that real life, I think that fills up that spottiness that Len was talking about, that you read about and that you learn in the schools, And it also enforces that ongoing dialogue, right? I loved how, was it Steve was talking about provocative dialogue. Like, I love that. That's the kind of stuff where you actually get to the real root of the problems. And I love having those kinds of conversations with my mentors. Like, you know, like, what did you do when this happened? And I don't share the good stories. I actually share the bad stories, the things that, you know, where I fell flat on my face, or, you know, because I think that's where we learn the most, right? The other thing is we were talking a lot about is, you know, how is professionalism going to change with all these things happening around us? And I really want to focus on the digital world, because now, believe it or not, when was the last time you might not have seen a friend, but you know exactly what they're up to, where they went on vacation, what they had for lunch, and how is that? They've got their Facebook, their Instagram. Students are texting now more than they pick up the phone and call. I actually had an employee who I wrote, call me, and I emailed them, and then they didn't call for 5-10 minutes until I called them. And I said, how come you didn't call me? And his answer was, I didn't know how to use my phone to call. I only use it for text and email. So, and another example to really drive it home was that the other day my employee came to me and he says, Elaine, I really need your help. And I said, what's wrong? He goes, well, HR's not giving me the information I need, and now, you know, we're going to be really late on our deadline, and you need to tell the CAO that it's HR that's holding us up. And I said, well, first of all, we're not going to do that, because we're a team, right? And the CAO isn't time to listen to things like that. And I said, well, what have you done? I've emailed them 5 times. And I said, okay, so her desk is 5 meters from where you sit. Have you tried picking up the phone or maybe going over to walk to her? No. I think so. What I was trying to emphasize is that I find that's probably one of the biggest risks that we face, is that losing that face-to-face, I know that's so important, relationship building, trust building component of professionalism that's happening, especially with, you know, just the access of a mobile phone and it's the easy of sending an email, right? So, you know, that's what I'm always telling my millennials and my team, like, go, I want you to go meet, you know, we have breakout rooms and meeting rooms, go talk to them, because that's how you establish relationships. And I said, and do people favors, because one day when you need a favor, it's gonna come around, because a lot of times people they always comment to me, Elaine, like, you get everything like this. Whereas I'm like waiting and waiting, like, can you go talk to this person? Can you go talk to this? Even other managers will say that to me. If you need something from the CEO, talk to Elaine, right? Like, she's an in. I don't really have an in. It's just that I've actually taken the time. I treat people like people. I give them my time, and I'm authentic about it. Like, I'm not just doing it because I want a favor from you, but I actually genuinely have an interest in helping you. I have a genuine interest in what you need and supporting you. So I think, if anything, in terms of what we really need to instill in terms of the millennials and the future generations, if anything, is the importance of that face-to-face interaction, and FaceTime doesn't cut it, even though it's called FaceTime. So that's it for my speech there. Thank you, Karen.
Well, there is we're going to break, but we're not. I think all of you might have a few questions and be willing to give up 10 minutes of that half-hour break to ask some questions if you're not stimulated by that conversation. Look at those. The hands are coming quickly.
Is it on? Yep. Excuse me. I found this a very, very interesting segment of the day, and in particular, Elaine, having you sitting next to Chad. Elaine, I listened to you talking about the value of calling somebody or walking into their office to talk to them face to face, and you're sitting beside a guy who has 50 employees. I don't know if you've ever met any of them, but it blows my mind that you're running an organization like that. I would be terrified of working in that kind of environment. I would be also terrified of hiring you because I'm so mistrustful. I'm a very, very suspicious person, and just to deal with somebody online, somebody I've never met, and you're hiring people, and you've got this team that you refer to. Like, what? I thought, what team? Do you ever see each other face to face? Are you ever in a room? Do you ever get a chat? Do you have a culture? I find it, I just find it so very, very strange.
There's a lot there. Okay. We should have talked about this at lunch more. Culture is the most important thing for us. So meeting together is important. We mentioned the retreats. That's not enough. You still have to meet in person. So we have groups in big cities. We pretty much follow the population where Ontario has a group, Alberta has a group, Vancouver, Halifax. And we get together whenever we can. And I'm going to read you something that I got at lunchtime from one of our employees who posted this publicly. I won't give any types of, information that's personal, but she says, I don't want to get too sappy here, but I have a weird experience this week and it made me really grateful to work here, so I wanted to share this with everybody. At my last job at a Big Four, I worked with someone very closely who lives in another province. We worked together daily for 5 years, but had never met face to face, did no video chats, and it really was horrible to work with somebody so closely, but I never got the opportunity or support when it came to meeting in person. This week she was in Halifax, and even though we're no longer coworkers, we made a plan to grab a drink, but last minute, without warning, the company she was with changed her flight and she had to leave fast. I just wanted to let you know that I feel incredibly grateful to be here, where relationships and bonding are valued and important and supported. Also feeling grateful to work somewhere where we are given autonomy and independence, and things like changing our plans without our consideration would never happen. Anyway, working somewhere that values creating relationships, both virtually and in real life, is refreshing, and I'm glad I made the switch. So I don't know if that answers your answer. Yeah.
Any other, yeah, there.
So I asked this question last night, so he's already ready for it.
You missed it.
So the question I asked Chad last night was about how you build trust in a virtual environment, specifically in this case, because you've answered the question about employees, but more so with clients, potential clients, who may be wary about establishing a relationship with someone they can't shake hands with.
Sure. The answer I gave you last night was, it starts with a lot of social proof, because in the early days, a lot of our customers were very small. They were techie. They might not have had a lot of money. So that's who we worked with, because that's who trusted us. That's who wanted to try this kind of thing out. But then over time, what happened was those people told other people, those people told other people, and eventually, the average client was doing $1 million in revenue, and then eventually it was over 5 million, and 10 million, and 20 million, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because that social proof of it actually working is important. So the working virtually thing is the sexy thing in the room. It's like, oh, this is very controversial. But when you bring it down to it, you have to offer something. And so I think what we're offering is this intersection of tax and technology with equal focus that is being laser focused delivered, with a lot of money put towards technology teams and operations, implementation, support, taxes, education. And, I never ever thought in a million years I'd pay over $3 million in salaries. I thought that would be the worst thing. It was never even on a radar. But now I could see paying 6 or 8, because the structure works when you build off of the things that you learn over the years. So to the point earlier about professionalism being an evolving mindset, I completely agree with that, because you grow as a person, you grow as a team, and the culture gets stronger when you make those focused decisions around professionalism. So that's how you get it, really, is that social cred.
Wow, they really need their break. Okay, I would just like to thank you very much. I think I heard a recurring theme actually from all of you. It was sort of people first, and Blake, you talked about the feedback loop and debriefing and how important that was, and that's a people first. So again, thank you all very much. I think the application of professionalism was a really important piece for all of us. So you will join me again to thank our panelists.